Welcome to the latest edition of the Burdock Group Podcast, where today we will discuss the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act of 22 that mandated sweeping changes in the regulations of cosmetics and personal care products. Joining me today is Dr. Erik Hedrick. Dr. Hedrick is an associate scientist here at the Burdock Group, and together we're going to illustrate the differences in safety standards and the impact it will have on the proof of safety. Here at the Burdock Group, we're a leading authority in food safety and regulatory compliance, offering tailored solutions across a diverse industries. With over 35 years of established experience as the leader in regulatory and scientific consulting, our brick and mortar firm located in Orlando allows us to provide our clients with on-site accountability, along with access to state-of-the-art scientific databases with the most up-to-date and comprehensive compilation of information to ascertain what steps are needed to bring your product to market. Here's a list of some of the services that we offer our clients at the Burdock Group. With over 35 years of experience in the industry, we are the experts qualified by scientific training to produce this type of work. And now together today, we're going to discuss what is a cosmetic.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the introduction. According to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, a term cosmetic, it means articles intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, or sprayed on, introduced onto, or otherwise applied to the human body or any part thereof for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance, or articles intended for such use or components of any such articles, with the exclusion of soap, which is regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. But realistically, when you think about cosmetics, what are they? So on the left side, you see a list of products we normally assume to be cosmetics, such as hair and nail products. However, on the right, you see a list of products that would normally not be thought of cosmetics, which include toothpaste, breath mints, and lipstick. So toothpaste is a cosmetic when it's advertised to clean the teeth. However, if you make any kind of claims like to remove plaque or to kill germs, it's considered an over-the-counter drug. Toothpaste, breath mist, and lipstick and lip gloss, they're all cosmetics, but if they are swallowed like any food, some companies might only use ingredients that are food additives or grass that meet the standard of reasonable certainty of no harm. However, prior to passage of MoCRA, these products were only obligated to meet the much lower standard for cosmetics. And I should also mention that there's no such thing as cosmeceutical or any of these other fanciful terms that companies like to come up with, and it might be part of their lexicon, but FDA does not recognize such language. So let's talk about safety and what safety means. So we're going to go over two extreme measures of safety. So can something be absolutely safe, or safety per se be achieved? And the answer is no. So with 1906, we had the Pure Food and Drug Act, which was passed as a result primarily of Upton Sinclair's manuscript, The Jungle, which revealed the nefarious and duplicitous practices of meat packaging industries and what was put into milk and other food products. And it primarily addressed food. And the concept of a substance that should not be able to produce harm at any level of any exposure was supposedly foreclosed in the 1914 Supreme Court case of U.S. versus Lexington Mill and Elevator Company. This was in response to nitrogen peroxide, which was used for bleaching flour and other products. And there's certain doses of nitrogen peroxide that are toxic, but it's not toxic at all doses. However, the federal government interpreted that the prevailing 1906 law, the Federal Food, Drug, and Pure Food and Drug Act, that no detectable amount of nitrogen peroxide should be present in the flour, and they considered this product adulterated. However, the Supreme Court thought that that was an overreach and believed that the interpretation of the law by the federal government was incorrect, that all substances in food should be safely consumed at any level by any people, because that's impossible. As we know today, with new techniques, it's impossible to reach such a level. As a result, the regulation was reinterpreted such that an adulterant must be sufficient quantity in the food to render the article of food injurious to the consumer before it could be condemned as being adulterated. Unfortunately, when the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 was passed, the concept of safety per se or harmless per se was reinstituted, and not overturned until the 1958 Additives Amendment, in which GRAS was installed. But at this time, the government was not persuaded to not employ the concept of safe at any level of use and in any circumstance, but the concept of safety of use, or as we more often say, safety for its intended use, was employed. So there's the other end of this. Can something be safe if there's nothing that says that that it's dangerous or anything that says that to the contrary? And the answer is no again. In this case, we'll take you to the use of potassium nitrate. So soda bottler Coco Rico decided to use potassium nitrate in their soda to achieve a desired color and taste. And their rationale was that potassium nitrate was already affirmed as GRAS. It was prior sanctioned for its addition to be used in meat. However, the government disclosed that there was no study showing that potassium nitrate was safe for beverages. And there was no evidence that potassium nitrate was GRAS for beverages, and that potassium nitrate in these beverages may be toxic to infants. So the court decided that no regulation approving potassium nitrate as GRAS for adding potassium nitrate to beverages, and that lack of evidence of harm is not enough to declare something safe. You need to have dispositive evidence of safety, or a classic anti-metaboly, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So you need to have dispositive information to show that something is safe. So if we rely on the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Acts defining the term safe as referring to the health of man or animal, then the presumptive interpretation of this statement is that safe is a binary. That it is, it's either safe or it's not. It's not kind of safe, it's not sort of safe, it's either safe or not. However, on reflection, there's need for more context. For example, safe for whom? Is this a specific population, general population? If safe is a binary, does the difference in safety standards for one category of substances versus another actually indicate different degrees of safety, or does it mean degree of assurance of that safety? Then who also determines the safety, and what is used to determine that safety, and then what should be considered in determining safe use? So let's go into how there could be different standards for safety. Because we discussed the different standards for safety, we need to acknowledge the meaning different standards of safety does not mean one category is safer than the other, as evidenced by the safety zone. It only means that there's a degree of confidence in the decision of safety, and that is different. If you use this illustration of the scales, both substances on the left or the right are safe, and they're within that safe zone. However, on the one side, the safe status of the substance on the left is supposedly supported by X degree of rigor. However, the safety of the status of the substance on the right is supported by X plus Y degree of rigor. Therefore, while both are safe, the latter has a higher degree of confidence supporting the decision of the safety. And rigor does not equate to the amount of data, but rather the strength of the data when reviewed in its totality, which I'll go into in a moment. So within these boundaries, the standard of proof has been met. And the one on the left required less information to make a standard proof or declaration of safety, whereas on the side of the right, there is more evidence to provide a declaration of standard safety for category B. And here's another thing that I want to go into. Like I said, it's not just the amount of evidence, but the quality of evidence. On the right, you see the seesaws where they're all safe and they all have a proportionate amount of evidence or a commensurate amount of evidence to substantiate the safety or meet the safety threshold to declare something as safe. However, on the left, we have three incidences in which safety has not been met. One of the first things you could think of is there's just not enough data. You have only one study that was done and it didn't look at all of the safety parameters that are required to justify safety. Another one, you could see unsupportive, wrong type of data. For example, if something's going to be dermally applied and all you have is orally administered safety data, that's not really supportive of what you're trying to make a case for. And then, of course, the other one, B, you see that there's a truckload of data. However, this is kind of like a data dump, or the data is poor, it's erroneous, it's conducted before GLP was established, or in facilities or by groups that were proven to be less than savory or less than dutiful in their ability to conduct these studies. So along with the amount of safety studies that need to be conducted, you also have to think about the quality and what kind of data you're providing. So when we move on to the standards of safety, what makes these standards different? Can these standards be ranked according to which requires the least amount of supporting information and in which we might have the least confidence to the standard that inspires the most confidence? The answer to that is yes. So as you can see here, we have cosmetics, dietary supplements, color additives, food ingredients, and food. And before MoCRA, we had this adequate substantiation of safety, which I'll go into right now. So pre-MoCRA, for cosmetics, you had adequate substantiation of safety. So really, safety for cosmetics wasn't addressed really until 1975 in the Federal Register. So with the Pure Food and Drug Act being passed, it was very evident that cosmetics were not addressed because you had many incidents occur with 3 different cosmetic products, such as Creme, Lashler, and Gestalt's beauty products, which contained products. So Creme had thallium acetate, which was known to be toxic. Lashler had paraphenyldimine, which caused blisters and severe cases of irritation on the face. And then you had calomel, which is mercury chloride, being Gestalt's beauty solution, and that also caused issues. So with that, and also with the elixir sulfanilamide poisoning issue happening, there was the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which was passed in 1938. However, it didn't really address cosmetics. And then, as I said, in 1975, in the Federal Register, it stated that you needed to have an adequate substantiation of safety and the product was not adulterated, meaning that it didn't contain any filthy or putrid substances or substances that would be injurious to health. And they didn't really define what adequate substantiation of safety meant. So the closest equivalent to adequate substantiation of safety really was substantial evidence. And that is a degree of relevant evidence which is a reasonable person considering the record as a whole might accept something as adequate to support a conclusion. However, other people might disagree with that. And this is a lower standard of a preponderance of evidence, which I'll get into later. Moreover, the decision makers were not defined, qualifications were not defined, and even with the 1975 Federal Register notice, companies could put on their label warning the safety of this product has not been determined. So it was really the Wild West of regulatory space when it came to cosmetics. And when we get into MoCRA, we'll see how that changed pretty substantially. So with dietary ingredients, we have something called a reasonable expectation of safety. So the dietary ingredients were addressed in the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act in 1994. And it essentially listed things as old dietary ingredients and new dietary ingredients. And old dietary ingredients were essentially ingredients that you could prove were in use as dietary ingredients and dietary supplements before October 15th, 1994. But you need to have well-documented evidence of that. And of course, FDA could disagree that it was actually used for such, and it's very hard to get that actually proven. So anything used after that date is considered a new dietary ingredient. And when DSHEA was passed, it was passed by Congress, and they essentially had this view that there was an inherent safety in dietary ingredients and put the impetus of declaring or determining something as unsafe on FDA and made it to where they would have to prove that it was an imminent danger to or hazard to public health. However, in 1997, FDA made a change to this and made it to where new dietary ingredients would have to be notified to FDA. So 75 days before you would notify or sell a dietary ingredient and a dietary supplement, you would have to notify FDA. And of course, if they didn't agree with your conclusion of safety, they could reject and refuse to file your notification. So again, they twisted it to where they were in control of dietary ingredients. So as I said this before, the diet for dietary ingredients, the standard of safety is reasonable expectation of safety. And the legal equivalent of this is a preponderance of evidence. And a preponderance of evidence essentially means it's more likely that it's safe as opposed to it not being. And the decision maker, as it says in 21 CFR, is really the manufacturer or distributor. in which people commented in the Federal Register in 1997, saying that there's really no indication of the qualifications of the data or the qualifications of the decision makers to make this data conclusion. And others have described this level as having more evidence supporting safety under the conditions of use than there is contrary evidence or in the absence of non-supportive evidence. However, the competence of impartiality of decision makers or the scope and the rigor of the database required is not really described, and it's very vague. And ironically, with dietary ingredient supplements, the dietary ingredient has a smaller safety threshold than the actual excipients and other ingredients that are part of the dietary supplement. They have to meet a reasonable certainty of no harm, which is the same as food ingredients. And dietary ingredients are actually considered food, and this was determined that it was a food and therefore not subject to the Delaney clause, which says food ingredients can have carcinogenic components known to animals be present. However, because dietary ingredients meet that lower safety threshold below food ingredients, you cannot add dietary ingredients to food. So the next level up, we have color additives. So we go from reasonable expectation, we go to the confidence level of clear and convincing evidence, or sometimes just convincing evidence. And according to the Cornell University database, clear and convincing evidence is a medium level burden of proof which must be met for certain convictions or judgments. And according to the Ninth Federal Circuit, clear and convincing means that the evidence leaves you with a firm belief or conviction that it is highly probable that the factual contentions of the claim are true. Both sources agree the standard is much more rigorous than the preponderance of evidence standard, but it's less rigorous than the standard proving evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, when we look at the definition of clear and convincing evidence, we see that definition is two-pronged by referring to persuasiveness of the evidence, that is, being convincing evidence, to support a conclusion of reasonable certainty, which is a higher level of confidence. So, unlike food ingredients, though, color additives must undergo a color additive petition, and they cannot undergo a GRAS route, which I'll discuss later. And getting color additives approved is very challenging. And the decision makers is a commissioner aided by experts qualified by scientific training and experience to evaluate the safety of the color. And then how a decision is made and how its color additive petition is put together, it's detailed in 21 CFR 71.1. So next we go up to food ingredients. And food ingredients is this key phrase which you're going to hear a lot: reasonable certainty of no harm in the minds of competent scientists. The term reasonable certainty, or reasonable scientific certainty, is an abbreviation reference to reasonable certainty in the minds of competent scientists, which has become a term of art since the passage of the 1958 Food Additives Amendment. When not used in the context of food designations, reasonable certainty really refers to a high degree of confidence in the decision made. So there's key takeaways for food ingredient standards. Reasonable certainty is a high degree of confidence in this decision. The decision makers are defined as competent scientists or qualified by scientific training and experience, and the substance is not harmful under conditions of use. So reasonable certainty of no harm for food ingredients, this applies to generally recognized as safe ingredients and the food additive petition. And it's for intended conditions of use, which is a specific use at a specific use level in specific foods and for specific, for either humans or a specific species. And then we have, of course, food, and this has really a presumptive level of safety. It's the highest standard because it's proven time and time again by common sense standard, by history, and it's evident over history of time that this thing is safe. For example, if you take a bite of a ripe apple, you've proven its safety. You know that it's safe. There's no such thing, or it's an oxymoron to say a poison food, unless that food has been rendered injurious to health, or you eat unripe foods such as green apples, or foods that are unripe or not in the condition to eat them when you're supposed to, such as like green potatoes that could produce toxic alkaloids. But in general, food, when you go to the supermarket, it's presumed to be safe. So the most key foundational interpretation of MoCRA indicates that there is a change in the hierarchy of safety for cosmetic ingredients. It went from the vague adequate substantiation of safety to the standard of reasonable certainty. As it says in MoCRA, you have to establish, to substantiate safety to a reasonable certainty of no harm. So then MoCRA changes the safety standard for cosmetics from adequate substantiation of safety to reasonable certainty of safety. Although, as mentioned earlier, FDA can utilize the tool chevron deference to change the standard to mean something else and use regulatory discretion to determine that it's not safe. So there's a lot of subjectivity with how this is interpreted and regulated. A most likely interpretation of MoCRA would indicate that you would have to demonstrate safety at the level of foods. And if you worked with us, we would tell you that that's how you would have to substantiate the safety, and it'd be very similar to a GRAS dossier or a food additive petition. So the law has been changed. Now this elevates the standards for cosmetics and the term safety for cosmetics, which will now become part of Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. But how are companies going to comply with the standard? Or more likely, how will companies be prepared to comply with this new standard? So we have over 30 years of experience and feel that there's three main factors controlling the validity of a decision of reasonable certainty of safety. These factors come down to three key points: the decision maker's expertise or credibility, the degree of certainty of the decision makers, and the rigor of evidence upon which the decision was made. So we'll first look at the decision maker's expertise and credibility. Referring to the National Research Council's reference manual on scientific evidence, the authors of the chapter on toxicology suggest that the selection of an expert witness should be based on several qualities, including certifications, memberships, publications, and so on. Although really none of these are specific to the task, and some of them could be more of just prestige level and showing, look how smart I am, to actually being relevant to determining the safety of a product. In fact, most of these qualifications only reference general knowledge, not specific knowledge or not applied knowledge. The most critical qualification should really be practical experience in assessing the risk of xenobiotic substances to the body. Certifications such as the American Board of Toxicology or the Academy of Toxicology Scientists, those are great certifications, but ABT is general in nature and not specific to a particular area of expertise. And the Academy may be somewhat more specific, but not as narrow as to confer a designation of expertise, rather experience in a general area. Memberships to organizations are really based on good character and only come at the expense of paying required dues. They're not specific to expertise. And the category of a membership in the American Bar Association doesn't even require a law degree. Peer-reviewed publications, this is getting more specific, but of course, the order of the authorship may come into the question. And how many publications was the first expert or last author, and were the publications specific to the area of expertise required? Serving on advisory panels may mean the individual has a lot of free time available, but drill down, were these panels on policy or sciences, and how many of these panels were specific to the expertise required? And then, of course, university appointments may or may not testify to a person's expertise in a particular field, but tenure. Because if you work at these places long enough, you're untouchable. And again, when you're trying to get experts, you want to make sure that they have qualified experience and training and experience within the specific field that is relevant to making these decisions. Next is factors controlling the validity of the decision. So what you don't want to have an unqualified expert. A decision maker's experience, here's an example. What the first comes to mind was the FTC's witness against the ads for Philip Colon Health. The witness, although a professor of gastroenterology at a major university, he admitted he had not read the FTC's requirements for a claim. He really ordered study designs that were way in excess of FTC's requirements, but admitted he knew of no dietary supplement that met these requirements. He also admitted he did not read DSHEA, or Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and he admitted he was not informed by FTC and the regulatory differences between a structure-function claim or disease claim. Now, while this witness may have qualified under the Fry standard because he was an expert in a related field, he was certainly unprepared for testimony. And if he had not had he prepared for testimony, he may have realized he did not qualify as an expert in this field. So when you try to get somebody that's going to make these for you, really want to make sure that their field is specific to what you're doing and not related, not vaguely related, or they just have a nice title. You want to make sure they know the field very specifically so they can address all the nuances and data information gaps that you need to provide. So looking at the decision maker's expertise or credibility for reasonable certainty of decision, in accordance with the court's Daubert finding, the decision maker should have specific experience in the field in question, not just general scientific knowledge, which would be consistent with the previously accepted Fry criteria. The decision should reflect the opinion of the decision maker's peers. If the science or technology is so advanced or so specialized that there are no peers having coalesced around a particular school of thought, the decision maker might want to avoid the implication of speaking for the entire scientific community. Instead, the decision maker could utilize the phrase high degree of certainty, in which the expert only testifies to the degree of confidence he has his opinion in. So, does there have to be unanimity among experts? The answer to that is no. If you're going to manage an expert panel, I would expect the panelists to agree among themselves, but once the finding of safety is made public, there may be some dissenters arguing that a finding of safety was erroneous or that the safety database was inadequate for such a finding. Whether this dissension has any base or merit depends on if the dissenters are qualified experts. And I emphasize the word qualified. And is there more than one dissenter or a single gadfly or two? Or are these a couple of people that just want to have their voices heard just cause? Also, have the dissenters been presented any valid data to support their claim? Or is this a simple dispute because they don't think enough evidence is provided, or purely academic because in academic fields, they always want more data to prove a point? The courts have found that a mere conflict among experts is not enough to preclude an acceptance of a finding of a reasonable certainty of safety. However, an acceptance of a reasonable certainty of safety does not exist if there is a genuine dispute among qualified experts that the use of the substance is not safe or the rigor of the data fails to meet the reasonable certainty standard. A good example is a study challenging the safety of aspartame. According to the authors of a chronic rodent study with aspartame, the study produced results contrary to the results produced in several well-controlled studies showing the safety of aspartame. However, upon closer scrutiny, the contrarian study had some fatal flaws of a game, changing the nature, and the FDA was not persuaded to withdraw the approval. The truth of the matter is that there will always be gadflies. There will always be people that are going to dissent against the decision, eager to criticize the decision, but you need to see what that dissension is based upon. Is it based on valid evidence, valid data, or is it just they want to be contrarian in nature? So how about the degree of the certainty of the decision makers? The decision makers must commit to obtaining a high level of confidence in his or her decision of reasonable certainty of safety. The decision should be one that could be made by any qualified individual in their particular field having reviewed the same data. If there is no question regarding the validity of the data, but a question of a subsidiary finding, a scientist with expertise in that particular area, such as pathologists, can be consulted. In this case, there may be pedagogical dialect where a question is approached from different perspectives and an issue is resolved. However, at the end of the day, the decision must be made on the data presented. Although any competent scientist wants to see the critical mass of data required for a decision of reasonable certainty, he or she cannot avoid decision-making in the absence of every scrap of data it is possible to generate. That is avoiding closure or suspending commitment. Unless the database is grossly inadequate, the decision maker must be capable of acting on the subject matter on the facts before them. Finally, among factors controlling the validity of a decision, and among the most important, is the rigor of the evidence in which the decision was made. The rigor of the evidence depends on four really critical components: the compliance with requested information, the thoroughness of the search, the validity of the information on which the decision was based, and of course, the completeness of the data set. So under 21 CFR 17030B, it states that general recognition of safety, which is a finding of reasonable certainty, is based upon scientific procedures, shall require the same quantity and quality of scientific evidence as is required to obtain approval of food additive. So if FDA applies the same principle of safety to cosmetic ingredients, which shall meet this reasonable certainty of no harm standard, the general requirements can be adopted or adapted, I should say, from the published guidelines for a food additive petition. Some of those requirements are provided in this slide. So, which include things such as the identity of the additive, if it's a chemical, its CAS number, its IUPAC name, if it's derived from a plant or an organism, its genetic name, the proposed use of the additive, the intended technical effect, full safety reports, safety investigations, proposed tolerances, environmental impact assessments. And one of the key differences with a food additive petition versus a GRAS is a food additive petition, the data doesn't need to be published. However, keep in mind, with food additive petitions, this will be published in the Federal Register and open to public comment, and you cannot redact any safety information. So food additive petitions in general take longer, much longer than a GRAS, but the safety standard between a GRAS and a food additive petition is the same. And a lot of people that want to do self-GRAS want to cut corners and think that FDA won't look at it. But if your data is inadequate, the FDA can come knocking at your door. And if you don't have adequate information to justify safety, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I would caution against any beginner that FDA may see compliance with its format as a test. So you really want to make sure that you follow FDA's guidelines to a T. And I would support this information with Eddie Van Halen's requirements for setting up a concert venue, which included the demand for a bowl of M&Ms, but there should be no brown in M&Ms. However, if he found brown M&Ms present in the bowl, he assumed that other requirements were ignored, and then he would call for an equipment check. So FDA would be the same way. If you don't follow their requirements or how everything is formatted correctly, or if you provide any suspicious data or do a data dump, they may think you're trying to hide something or try to pull the wool over their eyes, and that'll put you at the bottom of the pile. You also don't want to have any data from the ill-fated industrial biotech reports or reliance on the discredited chick embryo assay. Also, the agency could have more when they look and verify the data, which includes production and importation exposure via supplements or food in addition to cosmetics. And you also want to make sure that the data is GLP generated. In some cases, you can use studies before 1978 in which GLP was installed, but if that's the substantial data that you're using to substantiate safety, then it's kind of a weak case. So we highly recommend using data that's conducted in accordance with GLP and OECD guidelines for producing data to demonstrate safety for human consumption, or CVM guidelines for animal consumption for a specific species. A thorough search of the scientific literature is basic to finding the information on which a sound decision can be based. We have a variety of databases that we use, including some commercial databases, but the most powerful ones are the Elsevier-owned or Elsevier-owned Scopus database. Using just Google Scholar or going on Yahoo, that's not really going to help. PubMed is also helpful, but you really want to use high-quality databases that really scourge all the information is out there. And we have qualified expertise being able to look at these publications and determine which one's relevant and which one's not. Find data that's supportive versus non-supportive. And there's other databases that can be used in helping your search at Just Study Bases or EFUS. And there's multiple ways that we can find information and generate the data to make a cohesive story. So then you also want to consider the validity of the validity of the data used in the decision. So we have this thing called the Klimisch criteria, and there's 4 categories of reliable reports. Reliable without restriction, reliable with restriction, not reliable or not assignable. So for example, if you go into ESHA database and look at a registration dossier for a chemical, a lot of times they will assign one of these criteria, and you really want to look at that before you determine if you want to use that study. It'll also show the year in which the study was published. And you can look at all these factors to determine whether or not it's good to use in a safety substantiation. Again, does it meet good laboratory practice? Does it have potential bias? Has this been done by a group that's been discredited or by a method that's been discredited, such as that chick embryo assay? Other criteria, is it supportive to your case? If you're trying to justify safety in humans and this was done in like salmon, or chickens, it might be corroborative, but if that's all you got, that's really not meeting that reasonable certainty of no harm standard. And also, is the study conducted in English? Are the conditions well characterized? Are the parameters well characterized? Does it say it was conducted according to OECD guidelines such and such? Does it characterize the test item? Does it say how long it was done? Does it describe the groups, the test organism, etc.? You want to look at all these key important details because that's going to be relevant to determine a reasonable certainty of no harm. It's used in grass, it's used in food additive, and it would definitely most likely be used for cosmetic ingredients. So as I said, the data must be complete and divided into logical segments for a coherent discussion. You can't just do a data dump. You have to make a story that's readable, that's enjoyable, that somebody could read it and follow the story and come up to the same conclusion as you. You also need to take into consideration that if you're writing these, not everybody might have the same expertise as you. So you want to avoid jargon or using words that may sound fanciful or inflated. In reality, it just makes it seem like you're trying to come across as I'm so smart or I'm so intelligent or try to pull something off all above their heads. You want to make it readable to pretty much a general audience. So you want to characterize the substance. You want to talk about the regulatory history, domestic and foreign. Has it been grass? Is it a grass database? Are you trying to modify a food additive petition or proposed regulation? And then, of course, consumption and exposure are very important. And this is something we really specialize in. Is we have a proprietary software to determine the mean and 90th percentile. So the 90th percentile level of consumption or exposure is going to be very important in determining the safety ingredient. And it has to be at a certain margin of exposure or level below what's achieved in a 90-day, usually a 90-day rodent study, where you get something that's called a no observed adverse effect level. And FDA likes to usually see a margin of exposure of 100. However, it could be lower if you demonstrate that safety can be substantiated for that ingredient at a lower margin of exposure. Or, for example, if it's like an oil, you can only include oil into rat chow up to like 15% before it becomes doesn't want to become homogeneous with the feed and the rats won't eat it. So we use this proprietary software to determine 90th percentile level consumption. And with people, we use the NHANES database or USDA's What We Eat in America database and use food categories and food codes to determine which foods you want to add this ingredient to and how much. And then, of course, with cosmetics, we would do something similar with cosmetic products. And then, of course, depending on the cosmetics applied, you would also want to see some exposure data for the skin. How well does it dermally penetrate the skin? Is it going to be close to the mouth? It might be orally ingested. These are things that we would take into consideration with doing our consumption and exposure analysis. Then, of course, you want biological and toxicological data, or absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination. If it's orally consumed, how is it metabolized? How is it excreted? Does it get distributed to certain organs? Does it get deposited there? Is it rapidly metabolized and excreted, or is it metabolized into something more harmful or deleterious? And then, of course, with that metabolism toxicological data, these xenobiotic compounds that could be present, contaminants or other things, are they metabolized into such a compound that it would reach a certain threshold to where it'd be a toxicological concern? And then, of course, human data, there's anecdotal, clinical, and observational reports and interventional studies. Um, randomized controlled human clinical trials are usually the best for FTC's reliable and competent scientific evidence standard, especially if you're trying to make claims about a certain product. And then, of course, the overall risk evaluation, weighing the relevant values, looking at the totality of the evidence to determine if something's safe or not. That's what's really important for making a safety determination. And of course, references, we want to use primary references, not secondary references. They're okay for corroborative evidence, but in reality, you want to use primary evidence because you want to see the actual evidence in the report that's published. You don't want to see somebody talking about it. They might leave something out, or they might make their own conclusions that are not really based on the actual evidence, or just look at the abstract to make a conclusion. You want to see the actual report, see what was investigated, see what was looked at to determine if this is a valuable reference for determining safety. And of course, they need to be translated into English. It's fine to use reports from there's plenty of good Chinese or Japanese studies that have been conducted, but they need to be translated into English for FDA standards. So to summarize on this last factor, controlling the validity of the decision, among the most important is the rigor evidence upon the decision was made. You really want to look at the compliance, which was requested for the information, the thoroughness of the search, the validity of information on which the decision was based, and then the completeness of the data set. These are really critical for determining the safety of an ingredient. So to finish up, this is what we've talked about and what you didn't necessarily know approximately an hour ago. So how regulations come about, and that statutes and regulations do not always track as a result of the Chevron deference. The new cosmetic regulation identity and safety standards, how they were in light of the vague adequate substantiation of safety under the Federal Register in 1975 versus how they are under MoCRA of 2022. The meaning of the word safe, it's different for different products and the hierarchy of safety. So safe, something's either safe or it's not, but what's required to substantiate that safety is different. And then, of course, the historical meaning of the phrase reasonable certainty, because you may have heard reasonable certainty, reasonable expectation before, and not really know what it means. They're very common in a regulator's lexicon, but we want to put real life meaning to these terms and how they apply to the MoCRA standard. And it's really, even though it is a safety standard, it's really a term of art, and it takes experience to understand what these terms mean and what FDA wants to see. And then, of course, one of the most important things, the factors controlling the validity of the decision, of the reasonable certainty, and the validity of the people making those decisions. So your two worst enemies with MoCRA are procrastination and lack of credibility. And your two best friends are experience and persuasiveness. The due date mandated for MoCRA be enforced is December 2025. And an advance notice of the proposed ruling, I believe, will be December of 2024. But the final rule is going to be just shortly 18 months away. While there is some safety information available from ECHA or European Chemicals Agency or other sources, because of the unique nature of cosmetics and that there wasn't really a need to produce safety data for cosmetics, much of that information gathered through tests or studies, research analyses, or other evidence of information that is needed to achieve a reasonable safety standard is probably lacking in empirical evidence. However, we've worked with trade associations in the past, and we know it's very difficult to get an agreement on what chemicals should be tested and how much each member should contribute. And compliance is often very expensive, but we also say try to cost of non-compliance. And we've discussed the penalty for not submitting required data before the deadline, or trying to skimp on data and quote unquote pull the wool over FDA's eye and hope they don't notice you. The credibility of the safety assessments will also be an issue. You're going to see a lot of safety dossiers being published that are gathered within a limited amount of time because people have procrastinated and they want to go with somebody that's inexpensive or cheap. And they'll work with temporary workers, subcontract people, or get people, working at like a junior college that don't have toxicological experience, and they'll put something together that is very vague, and they don't have toxicology experience to put together something that's cohesive, thorough, and complete. And this opens up an opportunity for scrutiny of the submissions. And you better well bet that FDA will review and be scrutinizing these submissions. Therefore, in our over 30 years of experience, we've found that the determination of safety or of a submission to the FDA is more than a data dump. You can't just throw data at FDA and hope something sticks and hope that they will read it and be able to figure out what you're trying to say. That is incumbent upon the person who is writing the safety assessment. You have to write a narrative describing why you would like a favorable response. For a successful submission, along with meeting the burden of proof, you have to meet what's called the burden of persuasion. The burden of proof, obviously, that's the thoroughness of the discussion of all the evidence, the direct, indirect, antithetical, and making a decision in the totality of all the evidence. And all of that evidence must be relative and substantive. However, FDA has promulgated several guidelines describing the criteria for safety. There's a great deal of subjectivity that's left in the approval process. So when you're looking for somebody to write these safety monographs, you have to get somebody that understands how FDA thinks, how they review this information, what kind of questions they'll ask. And again, something that it's not just a bunch of information and facts, but it's enjoyable to read. And we believe that more than one claim of safety has been denied because of the subjectivity, because they've missed the mark somewhere. And FDA is not always very clear about why you missed the mark. Sometimes they'll tell you that you missed it for X reason, and they'll have 10 other reasons why you missed it. And you'll never know. And you get only one bite at the apple. Therefore, because the facts cannot always speak for themselves, the submitter must also meet the burden of persuasion. And this is what we call the theory of approvability. And we are qualified experts that have a high level of probability of meeting that level of persuasion. We have worked with FDA. We are able to generate monographs and safety assessments to make the case. We make an enjoyable story, and we will be keep very much abreast with MoCRA and how it's implemented, and want to help companies get their cosmetic ingredients compliant with MoCRA. So with that, I will take any questions, and I thank you for listening to this discussion very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Erik. Very detailed and illustrative to the point. So if you or your team are new to this or familiar, we'd love to hear from you some of your challenges. As Erik outlined in this, it's a process, and you have to attack it with the right mindset as well as the experience. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you. Join us next time on our podcast at burdockgroup.com. Thank you.